This week opened with the confirmation that Cormac would remain banned for the rest of the public inquiry. We had already been told, but hearing it again still landed heavily. It's becoming quite a badge of honour to be excluded from this inquiry, which would be funny if it were not so serious. Then came what I understood to be a further warning from the PAC regarding material published outside the inquiry, including podcasts. That was certainly my understanding of the discussion at the time. It gave me the impression that there was increasing concern, not only with the proceedings inside the hearing room, but also with public commentary about the inquiry and beyond it. Whatever the intention behind those comments, I came away from that exchange more determined than ever to continue documenting this inquiry. The proceedings then moved on to blasting. We learned that there could be 16 separate blasts in a 24-hour period, 8 in the morning and 8 in the evening, which is very different from the idea many people had of blasting twice a day. Again and again, new oral evidence appeared to be emerging from the applicant. We heard that there had been no explosives alternative assessment. We heard that daily quantities of explosives could not be determined because they depend on the mine schedule. We heard concerns that the dataset was too small to allow independent verification of the modelling. Conor Fagan for Fermanagh and Omagh District Council made the point that this information is needed at the point of consent. It cannot simply be pushed down the road into condition and mitigation. These matters need to be dealt with up front. Emmett spoke about the human impact of repeated blasting over decades, the volume, the frequency, the timing, and the cumulative effect on people's lives. Barbara Ward then gave very moving evidence about living on the Gortacashel Road in an old stone house with thick walls, and how blasting between 2014 and 2016 had frightened her so badly she thought the house was coming down around her. All she wanted, she says, was to continue living quietly in one of the most beautiful parts of County Tyrone. We also heard about St Mary's Church in Ruski, an ancient church with no foundations, and the need for a watching brief as the mine moves closer towards it. And then there was the figure that stayed with me, 42,000 tonnes of ammonium nitrate proposed for the explosives use over the life of the mine. Not one explosion, of course, but repeated blasting over many years. Still, the scale of it is staggering. Tuesday, 30th of June, began with the question of the explosive store. The Commissioner asked Dr. Gordon, appearing for Dalradian, where exactly the explosive store was shown. What followed was the usual journey through appendices, references and documents. Eventually, Dr. Gordon offered to provide a location map, but the Commissioner made clear she did not want any more new material. She wanted a yes or no answer. It seems the Commissioners are becoming increasingly impatient with the constant flow of clarification and additional information from the applicant. Third parties have been raising that concern ever since the beginning. We then heard from Eddie McCullough, who spoke about the final blast in 2016, shaking his home from top to bottom and leaving evidence of major structural cracks. Dalradian's response was that no claim had ever been made to the company. There was discussion around the security of the explosive store. If it was going to have no impact, the Commissioner asked, why was there then an exclusion zone around it? Carol Glass for Save Our Sperms raised concerns that despite locks and cameras, someone had apparently been able to walk in and out. And Dr. Louise Taylor said her own home had better security and described the store as a potential national security concern. Then came the familiar conversation about conditions. Conditions sound reassuring in theory. In an ideal world, they mitigate problems after planning is granted. But the question is always who enforces them, who has the budget, who checks compliances year after year. We, the local community, will be the ones left living with the risk of unenforced or ineffective conditions. Companies can change ownership, restructure, move on. Communities cannot. We remain long after the last ton of ore has been extracted. Then just before lunch, the inquiry broke early and the whole Tuesday afternoon timetable was abandoned. For third parties, these timetable changes are no longer just annoying, they affect work, childcare, travel, family, life, and people's ability to participate. It's beginning to feel like a war of attrition, perhaps not by design, but certainly in effect. By Wednesday, 1st of July, the inquiry had moved on into blasting, radon, norm, public health and EMF. Quite the menu for the final day before the summer recess. The day began with electromagnetic fields and now the familiar acronym ICNIRP, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. The applicant's position was that the infrastructure would comply with those guidelines. Public health appeared to accept the guidelines as adequate. But Fidelma O'Kane pointed out that reliance on guidelines can be highly selective and that modelling often relies on averages rather than worst-case scenarios. She also raised the concern that many of the studies are based on adults, not developing children. Dr. Alan Evans spoke about an increase in childhood leukemia risk. Niall McAleer raised the issue of a known cancer cluster in Mid-Ulster, which was refuted by Dr. Cromie from the PHA. Then Commissioner McCreary asked DFI who was responsible for considering arsenic and lead in the application. DFI did not know. Who was responsible for radiology? And again, they did not know. That to me was one of the most extraordinary moments of the week. Later in the morning, we heard from Leona Quigg, paediatric, neurodevelopment and neurology expert. She spoke movingly about the rise in autism in Northern Ireland and the growing research around air pollution, exposure during pregnancy and childhood. Her point was that not one exposure explains everything. It was the multiple exposures at critical stages of development can combine in what she described as a perfect storm. She said Northern Ireland is often quoted as having autism rates of around 1 in 16 children, compared with the global average of around 1 in 100. And when those still waiting on diagnosis are included, the figures here may be closer to 1 in 10. Her question was simple. We are already in the middle of a childhood health crisis. Would a development like this make that better or worse? In the afternoon, the medical evidence continued with radon, arsenic and lead. Dr. Alan Evans described radon as a naturally occurring radioactive gas that cannot be seen, smelled or tasted. He said its dangers are often underestimated and referred to the geological survey figures suggesting radon levels in Greencastle may already be above the average. Dr. Michael Mullen then explained that radon is regarded as the second leading cause of lung cancer. He also raised concerns about arsenic entering waterways and the food chain and about lead exposure affecting soft tissues, neurological health and causing symptoms such as headaches. The Public Health Agency position was that the assessment on radon, arsenic and lead were not deficient. Then, Caoimhe Warnock, speaking for Greencastle GAA, explained the club's concerns about toxic dust in an outdoor sports environment, especially for children and vulnerable people using the facilities. She made the point that cumulative exposure and long-term risk matter and that the precautionary principles ought to apply. Mr. Henderson responded that radon is not generally considered an outdoor risk, but I did wonder whether he had missed Caoimhe's point entirely. Finally, the inquiry turned to tellurium. Third parties raised concerns that tellurium did not form part of the original planning application as they understood it, and that it appeared later, increasingly presented as a critical mineral. They questioned whether this was a genuine evolution of the project or a convenient new emphasis. There were questions about whether tellurium had been properly assessed through DERA's discharge consent, whether the regulatory process was complete, and whether rural communities were being asked to accept untested engineering assumptions. Mr. Beattie, for the applicant, said tellurium had always been present in the ore body, but the question of when and how it would be fully dealt with was, at least to my ears, never clearly answered. So that was the week. Blasting, explosives, conditions, security, radon, arsenic, lead, tellurium, EMF, public health, childhood development, and through it all, the same thread kept appearing: uncertainty. Uncertainty about modelling, uncertainty about enforcement, uncertainty about responsibility, uncertainty about cumulative impacts, and always the community being asked to live with the risk. Nature spent millions of years placing these noxious elements deep underground, far out of harm's way. We can dig them up in a matter of months, but the consequences for the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the health of future generations could last far longer than any mine. So before anyone dismisses local people as alarmists, I would say this: look at mining communities across the world. Look at the legacy left behind after the companies have gone. Look at the health concerns that do not disappear when the machinery is removed. That is why communities approach mining proposals with caution. And before I go, if you find these updates useful and you'd like to stay connected with the campaign, I encourage you to join the Sperrins Community Campaign newsletter. It's the best way to receive important updates, events, new research, and news directly from us without having to rely on social media algorithms. You'll find the link in the podcast description. And that's it for now, and see you all soon.